Thank you for having me here, and I want to acknowledge that had we been in person, we'd be gathering on the traditional territory of Treaty 6. I am speaking to you from my office in Vancouver, located on the Coast Salish territory, the traditional territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. I also want to acknowledge Councillor Savannah Walking Bear from Thunderchild First Nation, who is a member of our board of directors at the First Nations Major Projects Coalition, for facilitating this opportunity for me to speak to you today. I'm pleased to talk a little bit about our organization and what we do to support our members. And as we go through the presentation here, I want to give you a little background on who we are and how we got started. So you'll see on the screen now is the map of our members. We are a national organization. We stretch from British Columbia to Newfoundland, but that wasn't always the case. Back in 2014, there was a group of 11 communities from northern BC who came together and decided that they needed to do something about the lack of capacity and resources that communities had to deal with the impacts of major project development. And around about this time, that same group of communities had just negotiated an equity stake in a natural gas pipeline. And they went to the commercial markets to ask for financing, and they couldn't achieve a competitive cost of capital. And so at the time, I was working at the First Nations Financial Management Board, one of the fiscal institutions set up under the Fiscal Management Act. Some of you may be familiar with what it does. Those 11 communities came to visit us and they asked, how could we help them make sure that opportunities in the business sector don't pass by in the future, and that what tools do they need to take advantage of equity opportunities that may come in the future. So we did a number of studies looking at the value chain of major projects, particularly in liquefied natural gas. And then we started to engage with the capital markets on what would need to be in place in order to produce an effective cost of capital to facilitate Indigenous ownership. From those studies, First Nations leadership at the time said, you know, this information is great, but what we really need is an organization that can be around to support our capacity needs now and into the future. So we went to work supporting leadership on the governance and the operational structure that eventually became what is known today as the First Nations Major Projects Coalition. In 2017, the organization was established as a not-for-profit society, and you can see by the markings on the membership map here that our origins in British Columbia have led to the majority of our members being there, but in the last couple of years, our services have expanded across the country to now where we have 75 members in 7 provinces and territories. As well, our total capital cost of our projects that we're assisting our members on is now in excess of $17 billion. Each of those projects has an equity stake for First Nations to take advantage of. This slide here puts it all into perspective. In addition to the 75 members we have across the country, we are assisting on 6 major projects. Each of them has an equity ownership component. And these are relatively large, complex projects that take a lot of resources in order to manage. So we work with communities as a not-for-profit to determine what capacity needs they need from us and how we can best help them to achieve their vision of success. And that is what we are doing on our project delivery to date. I want to speak to some of our operating principles. We are a very grassroots organization. That means we are member driven. Our members are involved in each and every aspect of our work. We incorporate our members' views into our strategic plans, our operational plans, and we also run a lot of our projects by committee. We have member-driven committees that make sure that leadership and technicians at the community level are directly involved in the project capacity support, so that not only are we getting direction from communities on a day-to-day basis about what needs to be done, there's also a transfer of knowledge that occurs between our organization and community members as we work to build capacity. We are a neutral organization. That means we are independent, non-political, trusted, and we provide a fact-based approach in everything that we do to support our members. We are unbiased. You will never see us advocating for or against a project or industry. We are there to support our members with what they choose to do, and ultimately they hold the decision-making authority to decide what project is right for them or not. We are not a profit organization. We are not for profit. This means FNMPC will not take a financial interest in the outcome of a project or become involved in the financial aspect of a project or outcome of a business deal. We are focused on maximizing value for our members. So we create approaches that help overcome historical barriers that have precluded our members from mainstream participation and influence in the economy. We also believe on the principle of collaboration, that together we are stronger. FNMPC helps on a regular basis our members aggregate their interests or work as a group to take advantage of the benefits of participation in linear infrastructure, such as transmission lines or pipelines. And reconciliation is an important goal in our organization. And through our work, we uphold the spirit of intent of call to action number 92 from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. As well, we are utilizing and implementing articles of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People throughout the work that we do with our members. In a more simplified format, our services are designed to inform business decision making. These services include corporate structures, benefit sharing models, financing strategies, and assistance with the capital markets. Interfacing with government, we have very strong relationships at the federal level and at the provincial level in some provinces. Impact assessment practices, we have a very robust environmental team that has developed a lot of toolkits designed to help First Nations and industry navigate the process together and to make sure that community values at the end of the day are put at the forefront of the decision-making process. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about some of the key achievements that we have made as an organization over the past few years. This table represents our project profile. We have 6 projects, as I've already mentioned on the go. This table provides a little bit more information as to what they are and how meaningful they are. The Coastal GasLink project is by far our largest capacity undertaking and the project that has involved most of our staff and resources. This is a project where 12 First Nations have come together to take an equity interest in a natural gas pipeline that is crossing the traditional territory of those nations in northern BC. We have the Niilo hydropower project. Niilo means our water in the local carrier language. There are 4 carrier First Nation communities involved in the project. Capital cost is around $300 million. This is a pretty interesting project as the dynamics of it marry economic development, environmental reclamation, and reconciliation together in one project. And I'll speak a little bit about that more later. Chatham-Kent to Lakeshore Transmission is a transmission line project that we have in southwestern Ontario. We are supporting right now one of our members in acquiring equity in that project. There are up to 4 other First Nations who are also impacted by the project. The Blackwater Transmission Line is a transmission line project in northern British Columbia. There are 3 First Nations impacted. We are working with them to ensure that the nations get the opportunity to become an equity owner in the project. And just about a month ago, the nations as a consortium were awarded a guaranteed price contract to construct the transmission line as well. So they are in the benefits in terms of the contracting and procurement side of that project as well. Tudika geothermal. Tudika in the Dene language means water and steam. It is wholly owned by the Fort Nelson First Nation. Once it is on the market, the geothermal project will be the only 100% Indigenous owned geothermal project in Canada. And we're thrilled to be involved in this one. And our newest project is Newfoundland and Labrador LNG, where our members in Maui-Bakeg First Nation have an equity interest in this project. And we are working with them to increase their equity stake as time goes on. So some of our service achievements related to the project, we have really worked hard in the Coastal GasLink project to achieve a deal structure that is less complex, reduces risk, and ultimately maximizes returns for the First Nations involved. We have learned a lot from this process that we are now applying to our other projects in terms of lessons learned and best practices. On the Nitu hydropower project, we have assisted the 4 communities in establishing a limited partnership, and we are now targeting government program assistance to help pay for technical studies that need to advance the project. On the Chatham-Kent to Lakeshore transmission line, FNMPC has been successful in advising our members on how to increase their capacity funding from the proponent, and we are actively supporting their ability to increase their equity share in negotiations with Hydro One. I will also say that we have been very active in supporting them on the regulatory process as well, with traditional knowledge and traditional use studies. Blackwater transmission, again, as I mentioned earlier, we are working to support the First Nations' abilities to own and operate the transmission line. There's also a tie-in to the Nitu hydropower project in this case, as the potential off-taker for the hydroelectricity from Nitu hydropower would be the Blackwater gold mine. Tudika geothermal, FNMPC helped the Fort Nelson First Nation secure a $40 million federal development grant for the project. That was a hugely successful thing and has allowed Fort Nelson First Nation to advance the project. And as I mentioned earlier, we are working to support Maui-Bakeg in their ability to increase equity participation in LNG Newfoundland and Labrador. You know, it's one thing to hear from me as to what's going on. These 2 quotes are quotes from our members as to how our services have impacted the ability of their nation to progress and move forward on their economic development initiatives. And I'll just pause here for a moment to give you a chance to read some of what they said. So challenges facing Indigenous investment. I do want to, as well as describe the opportunities, talk about some of the challenges that our members are facing. And the first challenge comes with the capital markets. In a lot of provinces, including British Columbia, where I am now, and nationally, really, Canada has not developed a national strategy on Indigenous access to capital. And for a lot of communities, and I'm not saying all, but for a lot of communities, access to competitive capital is a challenge. And it's a challenge because not many communities have millions of dollars lying around that could be used for risk capital, essentially a down payment. So what we're looking for in lieu of that is 100% financing, and that comes at a price. The last market sounding we did with our financial advisors on a project that was looking for 100% financing showed us that the capital markets do not have a friendly return. The capital markets came back with a quote anywhere from 12 to 15% would be the interest rate on the loan at 100% financing, when the return on investment, or the ROI on some projects, in particular this one, was in between 8 and 10%. The deal structures themselves can pose a challenge to Indigenous communities' abilities to successfully finance, particularly on new or greenfield projects that have a construction period to it, because early investment, if it's required, will expose nations to cost overrun risk and project delays and other risks that could be mitigated if the deal structure is done in such a way where First Nations don't have to put in money right at the start and can avoid those risks at all possible. For our member communities, they've said loud and clear that they want ownership opportunities, and for a lot of our communities, they also see ownership as one of the truest forms of consent. Because when you're at the table and you've bought into the project and you're making management decisions at the director's level, that means you're full partners, and you have an ownership stake, and you have a social stake really in the project at that point. And this is where our members want to go to realize their economic and social development visions. The last thing I'll say is capital markets require significant due diligence, and capacity issues within communities can be prohibitive. On a lot of these major projects, we're talking about capacity costs of due diligence in the millions of dollars. And this is not an easy undertaking for a lot of private sector businesses, let alone our communities who are already struggling in some cases with capacity supports. So this is where FNMPC can come in and be helpful to try and augment and add to a community's capacity ability. I am going to touch on deal structures a little bit as well, because what we have seen in the past is a tendency among proponents to bake deals or to predetermine the outcome prior to engaging Indigenous communities. And oftentimes this results in negative implications, where the community feels that they're being put in a position where the deal is already done and they cannot see their values reflected back at them. As an organization, we promote an open, collaborative, and transparent negotiation process where trust can be built. We've done this in a few deals in the past, and we have seen a dramatic shift in the outcomes from a historical approach of sort of take it or leave it, to one where the community has, or a group of communities have worked directly with the proponent and governments to build the deal. There's also tendency on the side of proponents to have a situation of over control that can open up larger risks, such as a completely unsatisfied group of communities, and therefore can lead to challenges on achieving consent. And we've all seen some of the regulatory delays, the court challenges that have come out of major project development when the proponent has not dealt well with the Indigenous relations aspect. And so ultimately within our organization, we're striving to create the environment where communities can see their values reflected back at them in the business deal. I do want to spend a little bit of time on attracting sustainable capital. This is an emerging trend here in Canada. I think we have a real push on in this country to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, achieve net zero, and mitigate the impacts of climate change. I think as well, our traditional oil and gas industries and other industries in the traditional resource sector have a role to play in this. And certainly we've heard from our members how they are interested in working with sectors to advance things like carbon sequestration, capture and storage, as well as hydrogen. We are also part of an organization called the First Nations Climate Initiative. We have a MOU with them, and we are working here in Western Canada to undertake strategies that look at industrial electrification and how Indigenous communities can play a role in co-developing that infrastructure to meet net zero targets and to ensure that there is a role for Indigenous communities to play in the energy transition. There's a cross-section between ESG and UNDRIP. ESG, for those who may not be familiar, stands for Environment, Social, and Governance. They are a set of standards that are used by the financial markets to tell whether a investment is of ethical standards or not. FNMPC has done a considerable amount of research in this area, and this has led us to realize that ESG standards were developed without the input of Indigenous people and without considering the implications that UNDRIP will have in the future on investments here in Canada. So we have been working to raise the profile of these issues and to highlight them. One of the ways we have done that is we held a conference last March that featured Mark Carney as well as Chief Terry Paul talking about different investment strategies such as Clearwater Seafoods that promote the inclusion of Indigenous people and how ESG targets can be met while including Indigenous interests in them. This is going to become a real big theme in future years as the investment community starts to understand the implications of their decisions in relation to the new environment where we have the declaration or UNDRIP in play. There are some additional resources. If you're interested in reading more on this, you can go to our website and download our ESG primer, as well as the case study we did last year on the Cascade Power Plant in Alberta and the Indigenous ownership that is in that project. Really, I think, embodies the vision of Indigenous inclusion in ESG investing standards. There are a number of case studies on our website that you can reference. Some of them relate to ESG. We have papers out there on improving access to capital as well, and a guidance document that explains how our resources are used. Again, this is more on the conference we held. Just want to highlight this for you. It speaks to FNMPC's mandate that we have on convening industry, First Nations, and government on key issues, such as ESG and net zero. And so this conference, this past March, was online. I'm pleased to tell you that we are going ahead with a in-person conference this April 25th and 26th here in Vancouver. It will be a hybrid event with an online option as well. The focus on it will be on net zero and the implications North America wide for Indigenous people and what role they can play in the energy transition. So I really want to thank you for listening to my presentation today and for inviting me to be here. It's been a pleasure. I wish I could have been here with you in person had the circumstances been different, but thanks very much for having me. I hope you've enjoyed it.